Hi, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. This week on Religion and Life, we explore the connection between theater and religion. From the beginning, Greek drama grew out of religious festivals, and early dramas explored the relationship between morality, the gods, and fate. 2.5 millennia later, and we still see religious and ethical questions arising in theatrical productions. Here to talk with us about this relationship and our own local drama, Horn in the West, is Teresa Lee of the Department of Theater and Dance. Welcome to the show, Teresa.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Great. So when we go to the theater, we probably don't think about religion very much, but perhaps we should, because there's been this intimate connection between religion and theater from even the origins of Greek theater. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit, how theater got started?
Right. Well, I want to preface my whole visit here by saying I am not a historian, nor am I a religious scholar. So that's sort of my caveat through the whole conversation. But I am a theater practitioner, a theater artist, and have been a theater artist for most of my life. So the origins, yes, the origins of theater, according to Aristotle, grew out of religious ceremony. Mm-hmm. We have evidence that some of the first ceremonies that were considered to be theatrical were the sacrificing of the goat and the community coming together to witness that. And so the origin of tragedy, the word tragedy, literally means goat song.
So tragedy, and that's one of the classical designations within Greek theater.
It was the first form, really, of theater as we know, as we think of plays today. Comedies came later. Comedies
and tragedy. And tragedies, as I understand it, really explored the relationship between the gods and human beings, mm-hmm. and wanted to explore the kind of ethical implications of actions in correspondence to the gods. Is that right?
Yes, very much so. Theater started out as instructional, moral, ethical, and civic. The Greeks were very much interested in having a society that was civilized mm-hmm. and educated and all of those things, but at the same time, everybody, of course, being a human being, were always questioning and always wanting answers to why things happen, and also fulfilling those needs. Every human being has a need to eat, find food, right. To have a family that's healthy and prosperous, and of course there's always been war. So everybody, all the warring factions want their side to win. Mm-hmm. So the way that they would hopefully make those things happen was to appease to the gods. And so by having these ceremonial events and that emerged, in the form of plays, they felt like they could communicate directly with the gods.
So, and that had that teaching function, as you mentioned. So
please them.
The person who goes to the play learns through the drama enacted in front of them how to relate to the gods, how to act in society, in a community.
Exactly. That word catharsis.
That's from Aristotle, right? So right. You have the association with what's going on on the stage. Is that correct?
Exactly. You see something, you see the event that goes on stage, and then you begin to identify and feel what they're feeling. And mm-hmm. that, from its origins, theater has actually taught empathy, and I think that's one of the really valuable things about theater.
And you mentioned a couple of times the community nature and importance mm-hmm. of this event, and I think I have an image here of an ancient theater, actually, mm-hmm. an amphitheater, if mm-hmm. we can look at that, because it seems to me that the space itself, the organization of the space where the play takes place is important, right? Mm-hmm. You have here we go, we have it arranged in a semicircle, the stage mm-hmm. is down front, and that is purposeful, right, to draw the audience in and to make them part of what's going on stage.
Yes, absolutely. They were designed for visual focus to be on the event down front, but at the same time it was curved and raised for the maximum benefit for sound. I mean, I've never actually had the pleasure of going to the Greek amphitheater, but I have heard from people that are there that you can stand down on the stage of the ruins and actually whisper and hear your voice at the top. So it's acoustically perfect. And so it was meant, and it's also, I think it's interesting that it's a round geometric shape in essence. So, very thoughtful. So it's a way of bringing community together, but at the same time, creating the focal point for the actors.
And it really is sacred and ritualistic space, right? I mean, it's where the gods and humans interact in dramatic fashion.
Very, very much so. And, as most churches that we walk in today, we can clearly see the influence of that, because you have a focal point up front where the minister or preacher stands, and then the congregation sits out front. It's all frontal, what we call in the theater frontal staging. So meaning that what's happening is in front of the audience.
And what's happening is the divine human encounter, right?
What is happening is the divine human encounter, exactly, which really, not just with the space, but with the actual mythical figures in and of themselves. The god of theater, Dionysus. For anyone who is not familiar, a lot of people are, was the god of wine and theater and revelry and all of that. But he was one of the last gods that was sort of included, in the club, in the god club. I call it the god club, right. Because his father was Zeus and his mother was mortal, and he was actually killed and torn apart. As the myth has it, he was sewn into the thigh of Zeus until he could be reborn. So, what does that sort of remind you of? I mean, it's
a death and resurrection story.
It's a death and resurrection story, exactly. It is, and interestingly enough, the son of a deity and a mortal woman. Right.
Yeah. So it does have implications further. And the theater, actually, one theory at least, is that theater evolved out of the Dionysian rituals and religion in the beginning. So that brings it kind of full circle there.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, one of the elements of Greek theater that has intrigued me is the Greek chorus. And I think we have an image here of the chorus. Could you comment a little bit on the role the chorus plays in a tragedy or in a Greek play?
Well, the chorus was primarily there to, I think it's sort of the link between the main characters and the audience coming to see the play. And the chorus would deliver a lot of the bad news. There would be messengers in the tragic plays, but the chorus would summarize what had happened in the tragedy or give the forewarnings, things like that. So they were really kind of the moral messengers. Moral messengers is, I think, a key phrase. Yeah. And so, they, but they are also kind of representative of the people. Do you know what I mean? Right. It's like the people that were in the audience could sort of look up there and see themselves or identify, with not only the events that were going on stage, but they could rely on the chorus to sort of guide them through what the takeaway, if you will. And that's part of the whole process of catharsis, right? It's creating that connection with the audience and empathy with the audience. Yes, completely. And it strikes me that the chorus is somewhat of an omniscient voice in the whole thing. The chorus gives us insight into the hidden thoughts
of the characters, perhaps, or their own
Absolutely.
predicament. So you get this kind of omniscient presence there.
Absolutely, absolutely. They knew everything, saw everything, and there was a lot of movement in some of the chorus work. Was actually considered dance. So moving in unison, and I think in terms of how I think about the connection between the religious event or the theatrical event and religious implications, is that the chorus kind of acted as a witness. I was when we were having our conversation, earlier, kind of coming over here, and I talked about the word martyr.
Right.
Right. The word martyr comes from the Greek word martyr, meaning witness. And so theater, really at its core, I think is not maybe as we think of it today in modern society as kind of a fringe thing, or it's something not everybody does. Certainly in its origins, it was something that was central to the moral and civic life. It was actually, you were doing your civic duty to attend these events.
It was kind of like going to church or to
It was
synagogue
like
today,
going
right?
to church.
Yeah. And that word martyr and the whole concept of martyrdom, of course, has tremendous implications in religions like Christianity or Islam, for example.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
To become a martyr is one of the highest things, one of the highest witnesses one can offer to God, actually. And that has its roots in theater, I hear you say. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, there certainly is that connection,
Good.
that connection because of the whole aspect of the witness. We come together in community to the theater, and we come together in community setting to church, to witness, to bear witness, right?
Right.
To
whatever. To encounter the divine.
To encounter the divine, right?
To learn about ethics.
That's right.
To learn about the implications of how we behave in day-to-day life. So.
Right. To be guided through the moral message and behavior. We are humans, and we have to have some kind of guidelines. Otherwise, it's just wicked debauchery. Right? Okay. That's the alternative, right?
Well, that's fascinating. But I think these connections are certainly not limited to the ancient Greek theater. We see them throughout Western history.
Right.
For example, we were talking earlier about what you call saint plays or mystery plays in medieval Europe. Could you say a word about that?
Yeah,
maybe?
fast forward through time, which again, not a historian here, so. But fast forward through time, when of course a lot of the Greek and Roman culture was completely destroyed, and we go into the Dark Ages, but then out of that, and after when Christianity sort of spread around, particularly Europe and really, the world, we have the Middle Ages, and then for about, almost 500 years there, from about the 11th, 12th, through the 16th centuries, there were what we call miracle mystery plays that actually happened on pageant wagons and went from town to town. This was, primarily what we found in Europe, a lot in England. Our culture harkens back to mostly those, I would say, the puritanical culture that came to settle this country came from sort of that tradition. But they moved from town to town on the pageants, wagons, and they told stories from the scriptures. That was the only kind of theater that was allowed. They were not allowed to do plays about everyday life.
So only plays that were based on Bible stories.
Biblical stories.
And they were seen as
Right.
a kind of aid to spiritual development, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And that sort of evolved into what's known as the saint plays. And then those sort of really just, for several centuries, took hold. And the importance about the saint plays is that they emerged out of the local culture. Saints were from different towns, or different towns identified with particular saints. And so the plays themselves could then be more secular in nature, because they could take license with the story of the lives of the saints, that they didn't have to be strictly adhere to the biblical scripture, that they could chronicle the challenges in the lives and the miracles that the saints performed and all of those sorts of things, but they could, they could sort of exaggerate those, and they made for really good stories. Yet at the same time, they still had a moral message, and they were episodic in their structure. They could have a lot of people in them, so a lot of the local people would actually perform. So it would give them an opportunity to.
So with these saint plays, we might see something that we would more readily recognize today.
Right.
So it kind of gives us a starting point for what we recognize when we go to the theater now.
Exactly. That was sort of out of that we begin to see more of these kind of legendary kind of stories. And then, of course, what kind of put all that to rest was the Renaissance. So the Renaissance then paved the way when Elizabeth made the rule that no plays could be written about religious topics.
Yeah, so we get this as history evolves here. We get this interesting conflict, I'm hearing you say, between, I don't know, sacred theater perhaps, plays, the mystery plays, the miracle plays that are just about Bible stories or religious topics that the church approves of. And then there's this evolution toward a more secularized theater that develops in England, in Elizabethan England.
In Elizabethan England, yes.
And religion's not exactly happy with that necessarily, right? That development. The church is not exactly happy about that development.
Right. Fast forward, of course, all of that came out of which, this is a short show, so we can't get into the whole, well, we need to have a whole course on this topic. But of course, the whole putting the kibosh on the no religion in drama came out of Henry VIII and the Protestant Reformation, and he would commission people to write plays where the Catholics were the bad guys and the Protestants were the good guys. And so she was a Protestant queen coming in right after all of that and the persecution of the Protestants, and so it was a political move on her part to say, okay, we're just not going to have that in the theater. So they recognized really early on the power that was in theater at that time, and the influence, and she very savvily used that, as did the Puritans later on, which you're alluding to, is that once Shakespeare came on the scene and all the body, and the globe, and as we were talking about coming over, they used to have all kind of revelry
in the theater
itself. In the theater itself, it became less of a sacred space, I guess, in some ways, and but it was still nonetheless a place for community to gather. But it was a secular kind of more secular kind of event. So when the Puritans recognized, oh, this is getting out of hand,
they shut it down, right? They shut down the Globe Theater, partly because of the secular nature of the plays, but also partly because it became a place where behavior they didn't approve of was taking place.
Dionysus began to rule.
Yeah, that's right. Back to Dionysus. But I think that's a very important point you make, that there is a power to drama. And that people can use that then as a teaching tool or a political tool, a religious tool, a theological tool, and that's what we see throughout the history of the theater. Well, this might be a little bit of a jump, but before we run out of time, I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing locally. You're director of our own, really quite regionally famous theater production, Horn in the West. And I guess I would mention now, like I did at the beginning, you might go to Horn in the West and religion might be the last thing on your mind. But given the context that we've been talking about, given the fact that theater has a certain kind of power, we might be able to talk about Horn in the West itself, involving and including some of these aspects, ethical teachings, mythical heroes, and whatnot.
Absolutely. You know, when you and I first started talking about having this conversation, you know, on the show, it just seemed to me a natural fit to talk about Horn in the West, as it really is kind of a derivative of the Saint play structure and of the whole, because it was born in the 1950s. The actual amphitheater itself, we have a model of a Greek amphitheater here in Boone, and if folks have never been over there, you should go over to Daniel Boone Park and check it out.
It looks just like the image of the amphitheater.
Just like the image of the Greek amphitheater. It may be a little smaller, holds about 1,500 people. But it's really quite lovely, and it's a natural setting. It's outdoors, of course. But during the time period, and of course, you know, we're limited on time. I can't really talk about the whole history of outdoor drama. But during the time period of the 50s and 60s was really the kind of the emergence and the popularity of these outdoor drama pageant plays. And pageant, not as in like they're not telling Bible stories, but they're sprung out of local lore. And you know, for us, it's called Horn in the West, but what that really is alluding to is the Western movement of the settlers that settled in this whole area. And of course, you know, their legendary, our legendary hero Daniel Boone is inserted in the story, and again, taking dramatic license with the actual historical events. He did lead settlers across the Cumberland Gap into Tennessee and Kentucky, but this story really begins with the Battle of Alamance and the settlers that are moving up into this mountainous area that we call the High Country. And
it's really a story about, well, if we talk about kind of values, it's about freedom, it's about independence, which you might call religious values in some sense.
But there are a lot of religious themes that run throughout the show, even though it's not it's not a sermon. But there's a character, Reverend, in the play, Reverend Sims, and there are several instances where he prays in the play, and in our kind of secular society that we have going on right now, we don't we don't see a lot of plays, we don't see a lot of shows in which we see people praying, and of course this happens to be a Christian religion, but yet that it depicts historically what those folks kind of turned to, what they depended on was their faith. And he's depicted as a Baptist preacher. Of course, at the time, he was probably more likely Presbyterian. So the kind of the dominant denominations were Presbyterian and Quaker. A lot of Quakers settled in the area. And Daniel Boone was raised by Quakers. So you have kind of the Daniel Boone hero myth. But he's
local saint.
Local saint, but he's rooted in a real historical figure. I mean, he really lived. And he was a woodsman. So in terms of when you think about kind of the religious spectrum, to me, it's just all over this play, because you have kind of he's the naturalist. He kind of finds God in his, explorations and the time that he spends in the woods, and adopting some of the Native American cultures and ways.
Spirituality.
And then you have the, the Presbyterian sort of influence, certainly with the English people. And then the moral dilemma that goes on in the play. And there's a martyr moment in the play.
So you really, the way you've described it takes us right back to Greek theater in many ways, both in the teaching aspects. The drama is about the encounter between the divine and human. It involves moral decisions, moral implications.
Yes, do they stay, and moral and civic. I know that the topic is religion and life, but there, it's really hard to separate that, the connection between religious and civic life. So.
And that's as a way to kind of wrap up here, that's what the outdoor drama does. It brings us back into community.
Absolutely.
It's a communal, ritualistic activity, unlike sitting at home and watching TV.
Absolutely. And it is a unique experience, particularly in this day and age. And people who come to it, I will stand at the gate and listen to people leaving. And some people really do have a religious sort of spiritual experience watching this. They're quite moved, because they see, something larger than themselves. And it takes us back to the roots, the very heart of what makes us American and what makes us, people of faith.
This is all very interesting, and I think we do have to teach that class someday if we get the time and the energy.
Yeah. So come see us at Horn in the West. Shameless plug.
There you go. And I want to thank you for coming in and talking with me today. It's been fascinating.
It's my pleasure.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all for this week's Religion in Life. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to ask at watch@apptv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Ozzie Ostwalt.